After a year of waiting, Borderlands 4 is finally out. But is it everything we expected? Well, yes, but also no. This is my review of Borderlands 4. This video will be completely spoiler free as well, so no need to worry about any story spoilers here. Starting off with the gameplay, the most important part when it comes to playing a game. It's actually incredible. The guns feel great, combat is amazing, albeit with slight optimization problems, but we'll get to that later. The enemies are super cool and fun to fight. The boss fights, for the most part, have super fun, engaging mechanics that keep you on your toes. Overall, gameplay-wise, Borderlands 4 is an improvement over its predecessor in every single way. The new movement mechanics really breathe new life into the series. The boss fights are actually super fun, which isn't something I've actually felt about a Borderlands game before, and the moment-to-moment action is just all around amazing. On top of all of this, the new Moxxi's Big Encore machine makes farming so much easier and quicker. You can literally go to a boss arena, pay $30,000 at max level, kill the boss, jump into the rift, and do it all over again. So I give Borderlands 4's gameplay a 10 out of 10. Writing has been a huge point of contention for the last few years in the Borderlands franchise, and while I can't really say much about the writing of Borderlands 4 without spoiling the story, I will say I did find the writing much better this time around than I did in Borderlands 3. Gearbox went for a darker tone for the story this time around, but there are still jokes. Significantly less than there were in 3, but much better timed and funnier than they were in Borderlands 3. The ending of the game was kind of a big surprise, and it's one of those things where you'll either love it or absolutely hate it, so do with that what you will. But overall, I'd give the writing of Borderlands 4 a solid 8 out of 10, which puts it on par with Borderlands 2 for me. Moving on to the thing that I was personally most concerned about, the loot. The parts system in Borderlands 4 has been completely revamped, whereas instead of certain parts giving stat bonus increases, they can just straight up change the functionality or behavior of your gun. For example, some guns can roll with a Hyperion grip, which gives them the reverse recoil effect from Hyperion weapons in the other games. Or you can get a Ripper part that makes whatever weapon it's attached to charge up before full auto firing. I had some pretty serious concerns coming into this launch about this new part system. I was a little worried that if every weapon can be a Hyperion, or every weapon can be a Torg or a Jacobs, then we would lose a lot of that weapon uniqueness. That a lot of guns would end up just feeling very samey. Well, I'm happy to report that my concern was completely unwarranted, because the new parts system is great. While I have definitely found a fondness for Torg sticky magged weapons, weapon diversity has hugely increased. The biggest concern for me was that a weapon would lose its manufacturer identity if it can have any part. But that's just not true. I was in fact able to tell a massive difference between a Torg shotgun with a Jacobs ricochet part and a Jacobs shotgun with a Torg sticky part. I don't want to get too far into the endgame stuff here, as the game did just launch less than a week ago, but later on, when I thought endgame farming would get tedious and tiresome a la Borderlands 3, the game gives you something to remedy that, which is huge. Overall, I'd give loot farming and just gear in general a 9 out of 10. The only reason that it's not a 10 out of 10 is because of the fact that enhancements still do spawn with weapon type specific stat boosts that tend to overbloat the loot pool. The open world was a huge surprise for the community in Borderlands 4. Up until now, every Borderlands game was filled with loading screens to go from zone to zone, which could definitely put a damper on gameplay at times, especially when trying to farm the Night Flyer from Rackman in Borderlands 3. With Borderlands 4, the game is much more open, with only 4 major zones, all of which can be traveled between without any loading screens. Mind you, there are still a few minor zones, one for each major boss fight and maybe a few more on top of that have to be loaded into like in previous games, but thanks to the Encore machine, you're only seeing the loading screen when you enter and when you leave, so they're really not a huge deal. The open world in Borderlands 4 has so many different things to do as well, right from the start. Not only is there stationary activities like the safe houses, silos, auger mines, crawlers, and all the rest of them that are always available, there's also random world events like the world boss events that will spawn randomly as you play, giving you a chance to fight a random boss in a small bubble, rewarding you with extra loot. Borderlands 4's open world provides you with so much stuff to do that it's basically impossible to not get distracted. And I think that's by design. I think Gearbox wanted players to stop and actually take in this incredible, beautiful open world that they've made. So they made sure to fill it with all sorts of distractions. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about as well, the actual design of these maps. Visually, all 4 of the zones are incredible. From the smallest detail to the largest building, you can tell that a lot of love and care went into designing these zones and making them distinctly different. There were many times during my initial playthrough that I had to just stop and take in the sights, as some were just absolutely breathtaking. With that said, from a strictly gameplay perspective, some of the maps are freaking frustrating, dude. Both Terminus Range and Carcadia Burn are very mountainous, by design of course, but the player's ability to traverse these high peaks and tall buildings is basically non-existent. If you fall off a cliff in this game, it could add a full 5 to 10 minutes of just backtracking to where you fell from. Despite being an open world, the movement required of you to get to a certain location can be very restrictive. There is no reason that we couldn't have had some grappleable points on the cliffs of some of these mountains, so that if we do fall off in the middle of combat, it's not completely devastating. There was a bounty mission that I was trying to do on stream, an acquire mission, which is essentially go here, grab this, and walk back with it. However, the item I needed to get was at the base level of Carcadia Burn, and the safe house I needed to deliver it to was at the top of a massive mountain peak. The trip from where I got the book to where I needed to deliver it was a 2-kilometer walk. And you want to guess what happened when I got there? I dropped the book back down to the floor level of Carcadia Burn, so I had to do that whole 2-kilometer walk again. There are definitely some much needed additions of grappling points along the sides of these cliff faces to make traversing some of these areas not feel so awful. Especially with how crap Echo 4's navigational skills are, and trust me, they're bad. Half the time Echo 4 would tell me to just walk up a mountain or walk through a wall. Definitely not very helpful at all. Based purely on the visuals alone, I would give this open world a 9 out of 10. But because of the zero care given to traversal and the invisible walls that still exist in the Big 25, I'm gonna have to give this open world design a 7.5 out of 10. Visually appealing, but rather frustrating gameplay wise. The menus of this game have been a huge point of negativity online, based on how basic and plain they look. Not my words, but that's been a very vocal minority's words. However, I've been operating on the I don't care how they look as long as they function good principle. Well, guess what? They function at only about 50% of where I think they should be. Menus are important in Borderlands games. It's a game about collecting loot and comparing that loot to your current loot. You spend a lot of time in the menu is what I'm saying. Starting off with the positives, we have an item filter, finally. It's a pretty thorough filter too. You can filter between type, manufacturer, element, rarity, recently picked up, and it's cool. That's something that's been needed since Borderlands 2. You also have multiple groups that you can sort items into by right-clicking on them, then hitting group 1, 2, 3, or 4, which I doubt I'll use, but I could see some people liking it. You've also got favoriting, which we've always had, which again needs a right-click. And you can also mark loot as a bank to know which gear you want to store in the bank by right-clicking and clicking bank. You can also mark it as trash by clicking X on your keyboard, or again opening up the right-click menu on your gear. Alternatively, you can pick up gear as trash by default, so you don't even have to sort through it in the inventory, which isn't really a menu, but it's still very helpful and I feel needs a mention. However, the negatives far outweigh the positives for the menus, I'm afraid. For starters, your current loadout and backpack are separated unless actively trying to switch something, which honestly isn't a huge deal. But when you're in your backpack, unlike every other game, your equipped loot isn't filtered out or even sorted all to the bottom. It's just randomly in there with the rest of your loot. And the only way to know if an item's equipped is by the small yellow check mark in the top left corner, making it incredibly difficult to even tell which items are stuff you currently have equipped and which is the stuff you forgot to mark as trash or want to put in your bank. And it can get incredibly frustrating. Hey, editing CC here. So as I discovered this morning, it is actually possible to filter out equipped items from your backpack, which moves them all to the bottom and grays them out. So it's definitely possible. but it's just weird that it's not on by default still. Another thing that's really annoying is the lack of info on the item cards this time around. In every other Borderlands game, a gun's item card would tell you the gun's basic stats, like its damage, fire rate, all that stuff, as well as any crit modifiers it has, the actual number for the zoom magnification of that weapon, the amount of ammo it consumes per shot, and any other useful information about the weapon. In Borderlands 4, the item card tells you the damage, accuracy, fire rate, reload speed, and mag size, as well as what parts the gun has, and if it's a legendary, it sometimes tells you what that legendary effect is. If you want to see your crit modifiers or how much ammo each shot consumes, you have to open your inventory menu, inspect the gun, then hover over to the little icons on that screen, which just feels like a massive step backwards for me. Not to mention the fact that nowhere does it actually give you a zoom number for your scope. There is zero way to actually know how much zoom a scope gives me. Personally, I like a scope that is very zoomed in, and the only way for me to gauge that is by using my eyesight, which, let's be real, isn't the greatest. Another huge issue with the backpack in Borderlands 4 is that it doesn't save your sorting option. In the backpack, just like Borderlands 3, you can choose how you want your loot to sort, by type, by rarity, by manufacturer, by recent, so on and so forth. But if you change this setting and close your backpack, it goes back to the default sorting of manufacturer, which is a horrible way to sort loot, as I'm never ever comparing a Vladof sniper to a Vladof pistol. I'm comparing my Torg shotgun to the Ripper shotgun I just picked up. So why not have the same typed weapons closer together by default, or just save the option I selected? This is probably something that I just need to get used to, but the way we navigate the menus, at least on PC, feels really rough. To change your category, you need to use Q and E to navigate categories, and Z and C to navigate subcategories, which just feels really unnatural to me, and I don't know why they haven't yet brought back the number key navigation system from Borderlands 2 in the pre-sequel. Again, that's something I'm sure I'll get used to with time, but it's just weird for me right now. The final complaint I have about the menu is the fact that your money, iridium, and golden keys are hidden behind a hover menu, which just makes zero sense. It's not like the currency UI covers any other elements of the inventory UI, so why make me have to hover over a little cash symbol to see how much cash I have? It's incredibly dumb. Overall, I'd probably give the menus in Borderlands 4 a 4 out of 10. They're nowhere near as buggy as Borderlands 1 to 3's were, but they're also just somehow less functional despite having more functions. You can't possibly review a Borderlands game without talking about a few bugs here or there. For better or for worse, it's kind of what these games are known for. For the most part, I had a relatively low bug experience. Right out the gate, I encountered a bug where Claptrap was supposed to be saying something, and I don't know if his AI froze or the audio he was saying was muted for whatever reason, but he just didn't do anything, which just needed a simple save quit to fix. Aside from that, I had zero other mission progression bugs, so I don't think that'll be a common issue for everybody, but still worth it to take note. In my full 24 hours of streaming, I had one single crash, which is about the same number of times my internet crashed during the 24-hour stream, so I think it's worth considering that as an anomaly. I have seen people online say that they are crashing quite frequently, so it may very well be dependent on the hardware of the computer. However, I can only go based off of my experience, which was one crash in almost 40 hours of gameplay since launch. There were only 3 other notable glitches I encountered during my time. Bounty objectives had a tendency to be incredibly buggy. Acquire mission items would sometimes be unable to be picked up, and in certain locations, bounty targets just didn't spawn for whatever reason, even though other enemies did. Ripper weapons, which need to charge before full auto firing, when I got downed, if I kept holding the firing button, wouldn't continue shooting once I entered Fight for Your Life. I would have to get downed, let go of the fire button, then when I'm finally in Fight for Your Life mode, I had to click again to start firing the weapon again, which made me really not like Ripper weapons. The last notable glitch I encountered playing the game was that the level scaling was all out of whack for me. I have a tendency to rush the story in these games, so sometimes the story will outlevel my character by a few levels, which is fine and to be expected. However, what's not to be expected is that after beating the story, I would be regularly encountering enemies who are massively higher level than me. After beating the story, I decided to try out one of the order bunker activities. I entered this bunker for the first time when I was level 33, and the enemies had exclamation marks beside their name, indicating that they are at least 3 levels higher than I am. And after several deaths and many attempts later, I finally made it to the boss of the bunker, just to see that the bunker I had been fighting for the last 3 hours was level 44, a massive 11 levels ahead of me. As far as I'm aware, this game is meant to scale with you for the most part, so this was very weird to me. This happened a few more times too, with random areas just being massively overleveled, or random bosses being multiple levels ahead of me when we fought. Level scaling has been very buggy for me in Borderlands 4, which isn't a problem at max level when everything scales to level 50, but can get incredibly frustrating at lower levels. All things considered, bugs this time around weren't too bad, but they also weren't great, so I'd have to give it a solid 5 out of 10 here. Borderlands 4 is built on Unreal Engine 5, and as is the case with most of, if not all, Unreal Engine 5 games, performance has been a big issue for Borderlands 4. My computer isn't the best of the best god-tier gaming PC I would like it to be, but it's still pretty powerful. I've got a Ryzen 9 5950X, a GeForce RTX 4070 Ti, and 32 gigs of RAM. With that said, even with those specs, it's damn near impossible for me to hit 60 FPS in Borderlands 4 at 1440p without some form of AI scaling on. The settings I run are medium preset DLSS at full resolution and frame gen on, and with those I'm averaging around mid-90s in terms of FPS, which is acceptable for me, especially considering that I usually limit it to 60 anyway. Sorry, editing CC again. I feel like I need to clarify my point here. 60 FPS for me is what I consider a playable frame rate. However, I do think it's entirely bizarre that with a 4070 Ti, I need to use both DLSS and frame generation on medium preset to hit that frame rate consistently. But the two biggest things performance-wise are that when you first load into areas, it tends to hitch quite a lot, which can cause driving a vehicle to feel incredibly laggy sometimes. And it seems the longer a game session goes on, the worse the performance gets. When I started my 24-hour stream, I was averaging around 55 to 60 FPS without frame gen on, but about 8 hours in, the game started lagging so badly that I felt I needed to put frame gen on just to keep enough frames to play the game. But then, when I closed the game and started again, I no longer needed frame gen to stay at a playable frame rate, so that's definitely something that Gearbox needs to look into. Needless to say, Borderlands 4 is in desperate need of some optimization patches, and Gearbox needs to get on it sooner rather than later. They did actually release a stability patch last Saturday, but I noticed zero discernible difference for my performance on my setup. The good thing is, at least on PC, Steam has a 2-hour refund window. So realistically, you can buy the game, see how it runs, and refund it for your money back if you don't like the performance you're getting, which is very nice. For optimization, I gotta give Borderlands 4 a 2 out of 10, which isn't too much of a surprise for an Unreal Engine release. Based purely on gameplay, Borderlands 4 is an amazing game. Its gameplay is top-notch, the loot is great, the enemies and the bosses are fun, and it's a little bit more difficult, which helps keep me engaged in combat. The biggest problem for this game is 100% its optimization. I genuinely believe that if Gearbox gets this game running better on more hardware, this could become the best Borderlands game of all time. Because for me, it's already there. It has the best gameplay, the best loot, the best bosses, the best enemies. It's at least tied for the best story in the Borderlands franchise. It just needs way better performance on more systems and some menu tweaks and bug fixes for sure. My overall ranking for Borderlands 4 is going to be a 7 out of 10, but could very easily become a 9 out of 10 if Gearbox fixes some of these stupid bugs and optimizes this game a lot better.